All right, thank you everybody for joining. Today is the final part of our 5-part dashboard webinar series. We will be going over our BitLocker tool and BitLocker compliance. Before we get going, I'm just going to take a quick minute and give everybody a quick introduction to Recast software in case you might not be as familiar as other people. We kind of revolve around 3 different pillars that we aim to accomplish with our right-click tools. The first would be improved productivity. Things like shortcuts, easy configurations. The second would be actionable insights to quickly surface data. And finally would be powerful automation to automate tasks and create single action tools to make things a bit easier for you. We have customers in just about every industry. I'm sure if you take a careful look, you'll be able to see people in your industry or perhaps your own company. Like I said, we will be going over the BitLocker Compliance Dashboard today. We have our software engineer, Mark Godfrey, to go through that. And afterwards, we have Marty Miller, who's our Customer Success Manager. He will be hosting the live Q&A. If you guys have questions throughout, feel free to post them in Zoom on the Q&A chat, and we'll get to them towards the end of the Q&A. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mark and let him do his thing. Thank you, Mark.
All right, so as Scott already mentioned, today we're going to talk about our BitLocker Compliance Dashboard. For those of you who might not already be familiar with it, BitLocker is Microsoft's disk encryption utility. Encryption obviously is a rather important facet of security when it comes to all your machines. Hopefully everyone's using it. And one of the things I frequently see is people will maybe encrypt their laptops, but not necessarily other machines because they aren't aware of some of the other benefits of encrypting them. For instance, if you have BitLocker enabled, there's actually a group policy called a machine policy lockout. It's similar to like a user policy lockout actually, where you specify a certain number of invalid logins and it can actually trigger like a BitLocker recovery screen. And essentially what this does is help prevent brute force attacks. So there are other more or less obvious reasons to use BitLocker widely in your environment, besides just obviously protecting your files. Something to keep in mind, so like I mentioned, this is for Microsoft BitLocker. If you're using like a third-party encryption app, which we have a lot of questions about frequently, if that third-party encryption app is using BitLocker on the back end, then it should probably still work with that for the most part. However, if it's using like its own proprietary encryption technology, it will not. So Microsoft has 3 different systems that it uses for managing and just generally monitoring and controlling BitLocker right now. You have kind of the original system that's a little older now, where you can use Active Directory to store your keys and the computer leaf objects, and then group policy to set some settings. You have Microsoft BitLocker Administration and Monitoring, which was the kind of the go-to solution for the longest time. Essentially, it's a third-party app that was part of the MDOP pack, where you have these special web portals that you can use for retrieving keys, whether by your help desk or self-service for your users. It would trigger key rotations when someone requests a key, so you don't have to worry about, say, giving a key to a user and them writing out a post-it note, which then makes the encryption useless when the laptop's stolen with said post-it note, and some other features too. It also stores on a much easier to access database. You can have like SQL redundancies and whatnot. Newest to this is Configuration Manager BitLocker Management. Microsoft announced at some point that MBAM will be going fully end of support in, I believe, 2024. It's already past mainstream support. I mean, they're not going to do any feature enhancements, but once it's like July 2024 comes around, it's fully end of life for MBAM. So their response to that is basically taking all the MBAM functionality and rolling into Configuration Manager BitLocker Management. We've been doing a lot of work to get our tools supporting integrating with CM BitLocker Management. So you'll see on this screen, we actually support all 3 of those scenarios now. I'm going to show you a little bit here about how to use our dashboard. You'll see in the upper left here, it's got the domain. A lot of people don't realize that you can actually change that if you have multiple domains in your environment and you want to look for a different one, and then just hit the refresh OUs and it'll pull in the OUs from whatever other domain you type there. By default, it's going to show you the domain of whoever logged into the console, whatever that user account is in. So I selected our Recast Workstations OU to scan. And I hit scan here, and you'll see we have these 3 pie charts. This far left pie chart is talking about where BitLocker recovery keys are stored. In our environment, it looks like most of them are stored in CM BitLocker Management, and then we have one machine that has its keys stored in Active Directory and CM BitLocker Management. But again, it supports Active Directory, MBAM, CM BitLocker Management, and any combination of 2 or 3 of those. So depending on your environment, you'll see that. You'll also see computers without stored keys here. So if something doesn't have a stored key, that might be something you need to address from a compliance standpoint. In the middle, it's looking at MBAM compliance. We actually don't have MBAM set up in this development environment anymore because we're actually migrating over to CM BitLocker Management. Essentially, there is an MBAM compliance status database that will populate with whether a machine is compliant or not. That compliance is determined based on the policies you set. Similar to the first scenario I talked about, MBAM uses some special custom group policy templates, and you'll say, hey, I want my operating system drives to be encrypted using XTS AES 256. I want my fixed disks to be encrypted this way. I want to use this for my recovery packages. I want those to be backed up in Active Directory as well. You set these compliance policies, and if a computer meets all those policies successfully, then it's going to denote it as compliant. If it doesn't, it'll say non-compliant. If there's no data on it, because maybe the system's not in MBAM, then it'll just show unknown. Likewise, we go over to the CM BitLocker Management Compliance, and this works just about the same way. This will actually use, there's a hardware inventory class in Configuration Manager that will show you a lot of the compliance data for this. If you actually are not using CM BitLocker Management, you're interested in doing so, they first rolled it out in 1910. They made some enhancements in the latest release, 2002. I have to not call it 2002 so it doesn't confuse people. And they actually have some more improvements to it coming in the future, because right now it can be a little goofy to set up. So if you haven't already done so, don't really feel rushed necessarily, because right now it actually requires you to manually run a PowerShell script to set up the self-service and help desk sites, which isn't exactly the most intuitive always, but those scripts can also be used to help you kind of migrate a lot of your data from MBAM if you're using it. So something kind of cool to look at. They're talking about in the future possibly rolling that into a GUI wizard in the console to just make it a lot easier to do all your migrations and have better error checking as well in that. So if you're not doing it already, it doesn't hurt to wait a little bit. Something different, by the way, that we see in this CM BitLocker Management pie chart is there's this extra little slice here for BitLocker Not Managed by this CM site. That basically means that, hey, I have some compliance data for this machine, but it's not being managed by CM BitLocker Management. And what that means, if you go into endpoint protection here, you make your BitLocker Management policies and you deploy them on a machine just like you would an application or any of your other settings packages. So basically, if this machine right here that's shown as BitLocker Not Managed by the CM site, it means it doesn't have one of those policy packs targeted at it. All right, so you'll also notice that if you click on one of these segments of the chart, it's going to actually show you these machines, just like all the rest of our dashboards work. So if you go over here and you see something that's non-compliant and you want to maybe do something to fix that, you can actually right-click on it, one or more machines, and you can run some of our other tools here. You'll see we've got 80 BitLocker recovery keys, so if you store your keys in Active Directory, you want to pull it from there, you can do so. We've got our MBAM BitLocker recovery keys. So that will actually use the MBAM API to pull the key. The advantage to that, rather than querying it directly, is that when you query it using that API, it's going to add your auditing data. So your audit logs will show, hey, this person queried at this time. Our audit logs, if you're using the Recast management server, will also show that, of course. And then it'll also trigger MBAM to say, hey, this key was queried, you need to rotate it to a new key at some point in time. You'll see we don't yet have the tool for querying keys from CM BitLocker Management. There's one more component that hasn't been migrated from MBAM that we're waiting on the product team to implement so we can use that API, and then we'll have that as soon as that's done. The last tool I like to talk about is this BitLocker status tool. It's great for remediating some of these issues. You'll pull this up. Unlike the dashboard that's actually querying data basically from databases, because it obviously wouldn't scale well to query, tens or hundreds of thousands of machines directly. This status tool does reach out to the machine directly. If it's not on, your computer is not on error, but you'll see, the different encryptable volumes, sizes, encryption status, so on and so forth. Actually, I'm going to run this on a couple of machines here that might have both of these. So let's go to, here, I'll show you this one here. That way you can see what it looks like on something that's working. So in this case, it's protected. It is encrypted using XTS AES 200 or 256-bit encryption. It's fully encrypted. This might be like, hey, it's currently encrypting, it's decrypting. Encryption percentage, whether it's the drive is currently locked, and then the different key protectors in use. So if we're on that one over there that's non-compliant still, we could right-click on this, and we could add some key protectors. TPM pins, start key, passphrases. That's something I usually recommend more for like a fixed disk or removable drive. Your numerical password, that's your recovery key. And then you can kick off encryption, and that'll ask you which encryption method you want to use to encrypt. Keep in mind, if you have policies applied to this thing, you try to use like a mismatching encryption algorithm, it's gonna give you an error there because you have to follow policy. If you don't have a policy set, it'll just work fine. You can also suspend or resume BitLocker. So say you're trying to do some troubleshooting, maybe you need to manually update the BIOS for some machine for your troubleshooting. You obviously want to suspend BitLocker first, so you don't get a recovery prompt after modifying the BIOS. So you can control suspending and resuming it from there. Lastly, you can back up your recovery passwords to Active Directory if you need to do it manually because it's not backing up correctly. And if you have this machine joined to Azure AD and Intune, you can kick off a backup to that as well. All right, one last thing I always like to show about the BitLocker compliance tool or all the dashboards is we have this handy little export to CSV button here in the lower right. It's going to ask you if you have something filtered at the bottom, do you want to just export the filtered data? Basically, what segment of the pie chart you're clicking on, do you want to just show that? Or do you want to export all the data pulled down for all these machines across all the different statuses? You just hit no if you want to export all of it, or cancel if you don't want to do this. And then it'll give you like a save as file prompt, and you just save the CSV file. You can then open that in Excel and consume it for any of your needs, or if, for instance, your security team wants a report, you can send it to them as well. Well, I'm going to hand you back to Scott here. If you have any questions, again, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom, and Marty will help answer some of this momentarily. And then if you have any other cool uses for this you want to talk about, by all means, let us know. Thanks so much.
So as we said in the beginning, this was our final of the 5-part dashboard webinar series. You can find the first 4 up on our YouTube channel right now. The 5th one should be uploaded shortly. Feel free to check them out in case you need any refreshers, in case you missed anything. We also have great resources on our blog if you want to check that out. And for those of you who have not had your 30-day free trial of Enterprise yet, you can get so at our website. On any page in the upper right, there will be a little blue button that says download tools, and that will take you to a little sign-up form where you can have a 30-day free trial of our Enterprise. With that, we'll get started on the Q&A. So I will hand the microphone over to Marty and the screen back to Mark.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for visiting and joining our webinar here. My name is Marty, and I'm the Customer Success Manager here at Recast Software. I'm very excited to answer some questions about the BitLocker compliance tool. So we've got some questions, so I'll go ahead and start answering. The first question says, this isn't me, I'm reading the question. I have thousands of workstations in one OU. How can I narrow down and search for an individual host within the tool? So you absolutely would be able to click in, yep, he's going around. But if you click on the name, you can sort by name. That is probably going to be the best way at this point to pick, to actually find a specific device that's in there. Yeah, the other potential, you definitely could export it to a CSV file and then maybe search for that in Excel. Might be a little bit easier way to find the proverbial needle in a haystack that you're talking about there.
Hey, Marty, one other thing I actually want to mention on that. So we've actually had a couple
Sure.
of customers ask about adding the ability to search based on configuration manager device collection rather than OU. The reason this has the OU is originally when this dashboard was created, obviously you control all this stuff through Active Directory, but as it's evolved, we've had some requests for this. So if you go to our feature request page on our website, I think there's actually a feature request out there for adding that, and then you could just make a custom collection, add it to it if you don't want to see all those devices and sort by name and find it. So I was just looking for the feature request page and upvoting that. We keep a close eye on that, and the more votes for a feature request, the more likely we are to add that capability.
Excellent. Always like mentioning the feature request page. If there are any features not just related to the BitLocker compliance tool that you'd like to see added, please let us know, because we do look through it and determine exactly what we'd like to add into the right-click tools. Good deal. Is there a way to trigger the recovery screen with your tool? Also change the key to a new one. Mark, would you be able to answer this one a little bit? With the changing the key to a new one, for sure. I don't know the answer to that question.
So I'll just do them in order there. So changing the recovery,
Yeah.
triggering a recovery screen, there's not currently. I actually, when we were doing this, I started making a little action to do that because there's a way to do it. Essentially, if you delete the if you delete the TPM key protector or something like that, it actually can trigger that. But there are multiple other ways to do it too. Right now, we don't have a custom built-in action to do that. However, if you're an enterprise customer, you should have RCT Builder and Runner. And RCT Builder is like our automation platform. If you're not familiar with it, I'm sure we have some videos on our YouTube channel that can help you with that. Or you can just file a support case, and we can show you a little bit about it. At any rate, if you put in, it's like manage-bde.exe- there's a certain command line argument. If you do like a /? It'll show you what it is, but there's a force one you can use for now, and then have a runner action to kick off to force recovery that way until we get that. If it's something you would like to have a pre-built action for, I'll point you back to that feature request page that Marty and I were talking about, because this is actually another good idea that we should add. I think I started on that years ago, and we didn't have enough demand for it at the time, so we decided not to finish that. In terms of changing the key to a new one, that's a tricky one. So if you're using like MBAM and you request the key using, here, let me show you this. You go in here and you right-click and you run the MBAM BitLocker Recovery Keys tool. When you request a key, it automatically triggers the thing to change at some point. We don't currently have something that will just do that without pulling the key. That's something off the top of my head I'm not sure how to do, but I'm sure we can certainly look into. So again, if you want to add a feature request for that, we could do that. And then likewise, once we get that API for CM BitLocker management to request their keys, that should do the same thing that way. Sorry, I'll hand this back to you, Marty.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for your help. Could you kick off encryption on a non-compliant machine through the dashboard? I believe Mark showed that a little bit earlier, how he could right-click on there, go to, there we go, and where we can actually go ahead and, set the different things that we need to, and then go ahead and have it encrypt the volume once we have all the correct settings set.
You'll want to add your key protectors first. Keep in mind, if you try to add something and it's like conflicting with policy, it'll give you an error. So make sure you're adding the right key protectors. I'm wanting to say if I add a TPM on this one, he has an ISO in the VM drive, which will probably give me an error. Yeah, so if I'd have to eject the ISO on that one because it failed to do it. But normally I'd add that TPM key protector. I'd add the numerical password, aka recovery password key protector, and then encrypt volume, and you'll select an encryption method. You can select use face only or not, and then encrypt, and it'll kick it off. And you can even refresh this periodically, and it'll show you the current encryption status, like it's at 80%, 90%, and so on and so forth.
Next one is, can this tool query the device and retrieve the key if the recovery key is not in Active Directory? fix what I say if I'm wrong, Mark, but I believe the recovery key would need to be stored someplace so that we can read it. I don't believe we can read it directly from the device itself. Is that correct?
So right now, what we do is, yeah, we can query it from Active Directory or MBAM. We didn't actually, I know of a way to query it from the device, but we didn't add that capability in our tools just because for most scenarios, that's not going to be useful because you're already at the recovery prompt. You can't query that when you're at the recovery prompt. I'm guessing the reason you're asking is you don't currently have, you have certain machines that don't have their keys backed up somewhere, and you probably might want to pull it and put it somewhere. If that's the case, I would suggest there's a I talked about that utility manage-BDE, and there's, I think if you do manage-BDE-protectors-get or something like that, it'll get the key protectors, and you can snag that recovery key and put it somewhere if you need to. Otherwise, what I might suggest is implementing one of these other systems like BitLocker Management, MBAM, Active Directory, or whatnot, and then it'll go ahead and it'll automatically escrow it for you. Those are really the best way to do that in an enterprise environment. You really want to have one of those systems going for you.
And you can keep adding questions if you have something else that you have a question about that we haven't answered related to the BitLocker compliance tool. Oh, here we go. Can you see what version of MBAM agent is installed on the device? So you could absolutely, and Mark is leading me here, go to the system information. It should show the applications that are installed on the device as well as their version number. So
I'm trying to find where it is in this one.
Yeah.
There it is.
There you go. It's called m.mbam, and that will show you the version that's installed. So essentially, you'd be looking at the device, doing a right click on it, and going to system information. System information tool is showing you can show you all the applications that are installed under that applications tab on the left. And then m.mbam is what you're looking for, and it'll show the version there. You also can do system information with multiple devices as well as an enterprise user, so you could see the different applications on multiple machines as well. Will this work with Windows 7 devices that will not store keys to MBAM? So we don't have a way, again, to query directly from the device. If it's storing the key someplace else, for example, in Active Directory, then we absolutely would be able to pull the information from there or in the config manager. Yep, go ahead.
So Windows 7 works virtually the same way as Windows 10. Windows 7 will work with MBAM. I'm guessing you're asking for more like a support scenario where, since Windows 7 is not technically supported, just because it's not supported doesn't mean it won't necessarily work with MBAM, because Windows 7 should work just fine with MBAM. Something else to keep in mind, the only big difference functionally between Windows 7 and Windows 10 when it comes to implementing BitLocker, I should say, is that Windows 7 doesn't support the XTS AES encryption methods. You have to use like AES 256 or AES with diffuser, for instance.
Can this do anything to store keys for secondary drives? I think one of the things just to remind is that we're reading keys mostly from our tools here. We're not necessarily storing them, although I guess I'm not sure if we can we encrypt, I'm asking you, Mark, can we encrypt secondary drives looking at a device using our tools or not?
Yeah, so if you're using the BitLocker status tool, it'll show you any encryptable volume currently connected to that machine, and you can kick off encryption, decryption, so on and so forth. In terms of like you already said, Marty said that we don't actually store keys in our product themselves. We're actually querying 3 other systems that I talked about earlier: Active Directory, MBAM, and CM BitLocker Management. And those will all support, actually CM BitLocker Management, they might still be working on implementing it for non-OS drives right now. I'd have to double check that. But those all support, if you set your policies correctly, backing up recovery keys for fixed data drives to like MBAM or Active Directory. It's a little hard to differentiate which volumes they go to. It's kind of goofy, but you should still be able to do that.
Does this tool identify BitLocker to go?
I assume you want me to answer that one. That's a great
Yeah,
question.
that would be wonderful. Thank you, sir.
I haven't actually tested this with BitLocker to go. I know BitLocker, it's been a long time since I've actually used it. The last time I used it, it was when we were working with, I think if I'm remembering correctly, the general use case would be if you have like a flash drive and you're wanting to use it on, you want to encrypt it with BitLocker, but use it on, say, like a non-Windows system like Mac OS, or say you were wanting to use it on Windows XP before BitLocker was the case. That's when I remember using it frequently. And honestly, we have not tested it with that. That is a great question. I would imagine it would, because if I remember correctly how BitLocker to go works, it's still encrypting it regularly, but it makes like a separate partition on there with some special software that's needed to kind of handle all that. So again, we haven't tested this, but I believe it should, based on my understanding of BitLocker to go. It wouldn't directly identify, hey, this is a BitLocker to go drive, but it should at least work with it.
It should at least identify that it is encrypted, is what you're saying.
Yes, it will say, hey, it's encrypted. Yeah. Here's the method, yada, yada, yada.
Okay.
While we're waiting, something else I thought I'd mention. If you are looking for more information on implementing CM BitLocker management, because like I said, right now it does require some PowerShell scripts to be run. It can get a little confusing. There's actually, if you look for Neil Brady's blog, you can probably just Google it. He has a really great guide on how to implement CM BitLocker management in your environment. His name is, it's like Niall Brady. And he runs like Windows Noob. I don't remember if this is on Windows Noob. I want to say it's on his personal website. So just Google his name and CM BitLocker management, and you'll see an awesome guide to help you out with implementing that in your environment.
All right, well, it looks like that is it for questions. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Marty, for putting on an excellent webinar. Thank you, everyone who came and participated. It means a lot to us, and we hope you learned something. Don't forget to check out the webinar recordings on our YouTube page. But for now, thank you for coming.